In this video, we are going to be looking at some of the new features that was introduced in PHP 7.4. As you already know, November 2019, the PHP core development team announced the immediate availability of PHP 7.4. That means that we can now basically use the new features that were proposed and approved for this specific version. So I'm going to walk you through some of the new features, and we are going to be doing all of this inside of a Docker container. To get along with the series, you need to first of all have Docker installed in your computer. So you must have Docker installed on your computer, and you must also have Git installed on your computer. Once you have satisfied those two requirements, then we can go ahead and have fun learning PHP 7.4. All right, so the first thing that I want you to do is to head over to GitHub, my repository, docker-php, and just clone it. So you can clone or download this to your local computer. So if you prefer to download, you download it as a zip and extract it, or you can just also clone it. So I'm going to show you how to clone, just in case you don't know. So all you need to do is type git clone and then paste what you copied from GitHub. That will be http github.com/docker-php.git, and then press enter. Because I already cloned this, okay, so it's already actually trying to clone, but I'm going to cancel that because I already cloned this on my computer. All right, so once you clone this to your computer using Git, and if you don't have Git installed on your computer, download and extract it, then open it in your favorite text editor. So this is my text editor, and I have opened that exact same content of the repository right here. So we have the index file, which is empty, and then we have a Docker file, which basically declares all of the dependencies that we're going to be needing for this series. And mind you, you can actually use this to run any PHP application, just the same way that I'm going to do here. So we are running PHP 7.4. Our base image is Ubuntu 18.04, and we have also installed some other dependencies. Some basic PHP extensions have been installed here. We also have Composer installed. We have Supervisor, SQLite 3, and so on. So basically, the setup that we have here will allow us to run PHP 7.4 locally. All right, to get started, the first thing we need to do is to come inside the README file, and we need to build the image. Okay, so I will head over to my command line tool again. And right here, I'm going to paste this, and I am going to replace this variable with my Docker ID. If you don't have a Docker ID, you could just use whatever you like here as the name for the image. So we basically want to build an image that contains an installation of PHP 7.4 and all of the dependencies that we need. Okay, so if everything goes well, we will have PHP 7.4 installed, and then we can begin to experiment with some of the new features. All right, so the image was built successfully and was tagged as Tedia07/PHP-7.4:latest. So what we now need to do is to again go back to the README file, and out of that we are going to run a container. So I'm going to paste the code that I copied right here, and basically what we're doing here is saying we want to run a container in the background, and then we want to listen on port 80 and map this port 80 externally to the port 80 that was exposed inside of the container. And then specifically, we want to also mount the source directory, so where our PHP code is located on our local machine, to the container. So this is the root directory inside of the container. So we are basically saying map our current working directory, which is being printed by pwd, to this target directory. And if we just quickly look at our Docker folder, we have default, which contains the nginx configuration. You can see right here that our root directory is var www/html. So if you want to use something different, you will just have to change this to whatever you want to use as your root directory. And then basically we are saying here that we want to mount all of the content inside of the current directory to this specific folder. All right, with that, we now have a container we should be running. If I should execute docker container ps-a, we should see that we have a container that is running on port 80. All right, so we have a container running on port 80. And if I go over to the browser, now just type localhost, we have a blank screen here. And the reason why we have a blank screen is because in the code, I don't have anything being echoed out. So we could say echo learning PHP 7.4 new features. Now if we do a reload on the browser. All right, so let's get again to the text editor and now start writing some new features in PHP 7.4. So I'm going to focus on these 4 features: typed property, arrow functions, non-quality assignment operator, and the array spread operator. So let's just finish typing this. Array spread operator. So the first thing I want to do here is to declare street type, set that to be equal to 1. I'm going to save that. And then we can now begin writing some code. So typed property, this was introduced now in PHP 7.4, and this is something that has been available in Java. And it's just so amazing because it allows you to specify the type that can be stored in a variable, the type of value that a variable should accept. So if you have a variable that you expect to contain a string value, when an integer is being passed into that value, that is going to result in an error. And this automatically means that we can get rid of lots of annotations in PHP. Let's start with a very basic example. I'm going to get rid of this. And here, let's create a class and call this class person. It's just going to be basic PHP class. And here we want to have some properties for this person. So the first one will be the full name of this person. And we want to say this should be a string. Previous versions of PHP does not allow us to do this. But now in PHP 7.4, we can say the full name of a person must be a string. If it is not a string, when PHP script is being executed, there's going to be a FATA error, FATA type error. Okay, so let's add more variables here. Public int age. And then let's add more. Let's say public bool. Let's say is alive. And then here I'm going to add a constructor. So before now, something that we also always do, especially those of us that use annotations, is we add these annotations here to say that the type of this value is a string and the type of this value is an integer. So this way, when we are using PHP Storm, it identifies that an integer was saved in that specific variable. But in 7.4, we can get rid of all of this completely because now we are specifying the type here. And as we know that from PHP 7.0 or 7.1, we already have type int, which means that I can also say here that the full name should be a string. But I don't want to do this now, so that I'll be able to illustrate the effectiveness of the type property here. So we have full name, and then we have age, and then we have is alive. And I'm just going to initialize this variable. I'm going to select all of this and allow PHP Storm to initialize it for me. So what we can do here is just a public function underscore underscore to string, and then here we can just echo or return something. And right here we want to say %s is %years age old and alive. So we can say %s. So we can say alive. So question, and we pass in the value, which should be 0 or 1. Here we can say this full name, this age, this is alive. And then we can come down here and say, or echo new person, or we can also set that to a variable, but we just want to illustrate that the type property works as expected. So for the name, we expect it to be a string, but here I'm passing an integer. And then for Boolean, I also pass in a string. And then we're going to attempt to run this on the browser. So when I just reloaded the page and nothing is showing here, and I expect that we already have an error, we can see that in the container. So we can come here and say docker logs. So let's look at the logs in this container using the container ID. And right here we can see that we have a type error. All right, so we have PHP fata error, uncaught type error, type property person, full name must be a string, int use. Okay, so because PHP is reading from left to right, so the first one that it saw was person, which has a wrong value, it has to report that immediately. So you can see one of the benefits of using typed property right now. So if you want to see this in the browser, obviously you can enable error reporting. You can say init and then display errors and set that to 1. And then say error underscore reporting and then set the level to ER. All right, so with this, we can also just view it in the browser if we don't want to look at the logs from the container. All right, so let's start correcting the value that we're passing in one by one. So here we want to pass in a string. So I will say Terry. And then the age should be an integer. So let's say Terry is 18. And this should be a Boolean. So if we use wrong values here, obviously we're also going to get errors. So let's try to reload. See here, is alive must be a Boolean, but we pass in a string. All right, so this is because we're using typed properties. And here, passing true. And now, when we do a reload, everything should work as expected. So apart from just using these on scalar type, which are the variables that we've defined, we defined a few. You can also use this on array and all the other scalar types that we have. We can also use a class here. So for example, let's create a new class here and call this class student. And then right here, we can create a public student. So we are creating a new property called student, and we are saying the type should be a student. So if we were accepting student here and instantiating that to a variable, this student, So if we come here now and put something that is not an instance of student, we get an error. So let's do a reload. And you see we get an error. Type property person student must be an instance of the student class, but we pass in a string. So this is a very, very useful feature in PHP. So we can change this to new student. And for me, I think this is a really significant feature. We have this feature in Java. If you have used Java before, you know that we have typed properties in Java. That makes it really, really important that when you define, for example, a function or a property, you need to specify the type. This will prevent lots of bug in your code in the long run. All right, so that's basically it for typed property. You can read more about this in the RFC document. Let's get to the next one. So the next one that we have here is the arrow function. And I'm going to illustrate this with some basic example. I will create an array here and just assign some values to this array. So in this array, we're going to have some numbers 1, 2, 4, 6, 10, 8, 9, 14. And we basically want to filter out from this array all the even numbers. So we can do this using the array function, array filter function in PHP. So we can say even numbers is equal to array underscore filter. So the first argument will be the array that we want to filter, and then the next one will be a closure. So when we pass it a closure, we can then do something inside of this closure. So this is an example of how we would do array filter in older versions of PHP. So here I could say return. So we need to pass in each of the value from the array here, and then say return value modulus 2 is equal to 0. So if it is true, it will be added into this variable. If it is false, then it will be skipped. And here we can say do a var dump of even numbers. And then we can do a reload on the browser. Okay, so we have here all of the even numbers 14, 8, 10, 6, 4, and 2. How can we do this using arrow functions in PHP, which is a really cool feature that I also like. So let's see how we can fine-tune our code using arrow functions. So we want to do exactly the same thing using this variable. We want to also do array filter. And this time, let's come down here and say even numbers arrow function. Okay, so the first thing that we do is to pass in the array, and then we can now get rid of all of these completely and then say fn. So fn is just short closure. So instead of typing all of the function, we just say fn, and then we can also grab the value just as we did before, and then now we can type in an arrow here and say we want to return the result of an expression, which in our case is value modulus 2 equal to 0. So this is exactly, it's equivalent to the code that we have here. So what we can now do is to do a var dump on this and compare the results. So we can say var dump, and let's compare the results. So let's see on the browser. You can see that we have the exact same results. And the second one, where we use the arrow function, is really clean, much cleaner than the first one where we have the return statement here and we typed out everything completely. You can see it's really amazing that we can just return something directly from here. So another benefit of this arrow function is the fact that we can directly use variables from the parent scope. if you know what I mean. In PHP, if we want to pass in a variable to a closure, we need to use a construct, or we need to use the use statement. So let's say here I want to pass in checker instead of to. I want to use checker. So let's say here checker, and then let's save. When we do a reload, it's going to be an error, undefined variable checker. Okay, so which is basically because this closure that we're using here is not aware of this variable. It doesn't have access to the variable defined in the parent scope. So we can then say here use checker, and that will immediately resolve the error that we got previously. But now in arrow functions, we don't need to do any of that. We don't need to use the use statement as we're using here. We can directly just say checker, and it has access to this variable from the parent scope. So if I do a reload here, runs as expected. There is no errors. And another thing that we can also have access to is when we are inside of a class, we can immediately use this keyword. We can just illustrate that quickly by creating a simple class here. So let's just say class, let's call this even numbers, and then here we want to say public, or we could also say private array, and we call this an array. So that should be equal to the values that we have here. And then we can also have private int checker, and that should be equal to 2. And then here we could have a constructor public function underscore construct, and then we are basically going to run this here. So we could just say do a var dump of this, and then we can refer to the properties of the class using this keyword. Okay, so if we create an instance of person, so let's get rid of some number here just to ensure that we have different results. So I could just come here and say new person, new even number, and then we can reload on the browser. So it says undefined property even number. So let's try to access it as a class and then see. Undefined property even number array. Okay, so I was looking at the wrong thing actually. So we don't have array defined here. Okay, and then let's do a reload on the browser. Okay, so now we get the exact same result, which is the correct output that we need. So what to take note of here is that when using arrow function, we can directly have access to the variable that are declared in the parent scope, and also we can use this keyword as we can use in closures usually. And then something important to take note of is that an arrow function may only contain one expression, okay, which is also the return statement. So it must be one expression. You cannot have more than one expression returned from the arrow function. Okay, so let's look at the third one. So that will be non-coalescing assignment operator. So in PHP 7.1 and all of the 7s that we have before 7.4, we could do something like this. I could create a variable called foo, and that should be equal to bar, and then I try to access element in position 0. If it doesn't exist, I'll say not exist. And then here we could just echo foo. So this should basically give us or display the text not exist in the browser. So let's see that. Okay, so instead of getting an error, which is a very weird error in PHP, index undefined. So we are trying to access this bar 0. First of all, bar is not defined as a variable, and also we don't have element 0 because bar is not defined. Instead of getting an error, because of the coalescing operator that we have here, it just return not exist. Okay, so this is very useful in most cases. So if I were to set this to be equal to an associative array, for example, so let's say now that we have a key here, which is called name, and the name is Terry on. So we have this key called name. If we also try to run this, we're still going to get not exist. And the reason is because we are accessing an index that doesn't exist. But if we change this to name, then we should get Terry O. All right. So now in PHP 7.4, we can actually reduce this to like really short statement. So what we can do now is to, let's say here, I want to say foo colon equal assignment. Okay, so can you detect the difference between these two? If I come here and do a var dump on foo, let's just call this foo new, and then replace this. So you can see what we're doing here is basically reducing this to nothing. If we bring this here, or let's just reload first to see we don't get any error. All right, so we get assignment, which means things are working as expected. And then let's come here and just paste bar name. So basically what we are saying here, we can put an echo here, or we can grab all of this essentially and just put in the var dump. So we're saying if there is bar name, display bar name, otherwise return assignment. Let's do a reload. You see, because bar name exists, it's being returned. But if it doesn't exist, as in the previous case, if we put a 0 here, then assignment is being returned, which is just a nice way to reduce the amount of code that we need to write here. And then the final one that we want to talk about is the array spread operator, which is also very important. So we're going to see like really few examples, and then you can read more about all of these in the documentation. So I'm going to create two arrays here. I'm going to say one is equal to unit test. Then we're going to add one more here called TDD. And then 2 is going to be equal to something entirely different. So this could be anything, just using this for illustrations. Okay, so let's say 2 will be equal to numeric values. So let's say 56, 90, 35. So from this two array, previously what we will do in PHP, assuming we want to have a new or merge these two array together, what we do is in PHP is to use array merge. So I could say new array is equal to array underscore merge. So we want to merge 1 and 2. Okay, and then we can do a var dump on this. So we could say var dump new array. So if everything works as expected, we should see those array mesh together. So now we have an array with 5 elements. So with the spread operator, we don't need to call any function. We can just simply use a construct. So to illustrate that, let's just come here and say spread. Let's call this variable spread array should be equal to. So what I want to do is to just create a new array. I could basically use back my existing array, okay, which is the new array that I have before, or I could just put new element here. So I could say PHP 7.4, and then if I want to match the existing array, I could use dot 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 and then say 1. Okay, and then I could also say dot 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 2. So in PHP 7.4, this is completely valid syntax. This is already implemented in JavaScript. In the new JavaScript, you could actually do this in new JavaScript. So that if I come here and do a var dump, and then we do a reload on the browser, we can see right here that we have a new array without having to use the array merge function. Okay, so this is a significant improvement because we are not making any call to a function. We are basically using a construct to spread the array. So that's the basis of the spread operator in PHP. You can read more about all of these features in the PHP official ROFC document for each of them, which you can find on PHP website. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and also click on the notification bell if you want to receive notifications from me. Thank you for viewing and see you next time.